Welcome in to another episode of Betting the Pitch. I'm your host, the real underscore G Warner. This is the Champions League knockout edition of the Betting the Pitch. Going to do one next week as well, but want to get everything in there. Going to start going through potential futures plays as they were very kind to me last year. Maybe a little bit kinder in the Europa League, which we will do, or not we. I will do a podcast probably at some point on Valentine's Day for those Europa League and Europa Conference League. But will be a Champions League knockout edition. I will put out an ultimate best bet as always on Instagram, Patreon, Twitter. Well, that's where you can follow me, the real underscore you want, Instagram, Patreon, Twitter, and YouTube. But I'll go with a reel on Instagram at the real underscore G Warner and a 1 minute short on YouTube if that's a better way for you to consume this content. Appreciate all of you subscribers on Patreon, of course, all my patrons, plus anyone that's listening or subscribed to the YouTube channel. 5-star reviews are huge on Apple Podcasts or on Spotify. But let's get right into it. So we do have some matches on Tuesday and Wednesday this week, and should be pretty interesting, I would think. Some kind of big, drastic, big underdogs, unfortunately. But it's like one of those things where it is. I'm actually pretty excited for it, and I think Champions League in general has been pretty profitable this season. So let's try to keep that going. And I'm going to eventually stop stalling once I figure out how to get on. So all lines quoted courtesy of betonline.ag. I have a link in the podcast description and in the on anywhere you're consuming this. If you're watching live on Twitter right now, unfortunately, you're gonna have to go to one of the previous websites or on my pinned post or tweet on my profile. But you basically have promo codes through if you click the links that are in the podcast description for BetOnline or sportsbetting.ag, and you can get a 50% match for a first time deposit or a 100% up to $500 at sportsbetting.ag. They're the same sites. They seem to operate exactly the same, just one's red and one's blue. So go check that out. If you're not a member at one, go join the other because the bonuses still apply, and it's really worth it to use casinos money against them. So we'll start with Copenhagen taking on or hosting Manchester City in one of those extremely large potential blowout scenarios. But being that these are two-leg ties, I think there's a lot of conservatism that you'd expect in first legs, really just because you don't want to be out of it after the first leg. And I think there's some big risk that Manchester City can put a ton of goals past Copenhagen if they decide to open up. But we didn't really see that in the group stage when they were with Manchester United, Galatasaray, and Bayern Munchen. And ultimately, I think their goalless draw with Bayern Munchen was a huge reason why they advanced to the Champions League knockout rounds. Huge for the team, club, city, country, everything. I'm sure this is basically the Real Madrid or the Manchester City even. Manchester City is a little bit harder to say, but it's basically the biggest club in Denmark, and they've done a great job to be in this round. And I think they've got Mohamed El Yunusi, who's probably a name that would be known from the English Premier League, but he's moved on to Copenhagen, and they are going to play a lot of defense, and that's my expectation. So I'll give you the numbers now. Copenhagen, a 1 3/4 goal underdog right now. All the juice on Manchester City on the road. Over under is 3 with a slightly juiced towards over. So Copenhagen, it looked like earlier when I first put lines on, I don't have the date exactly, but I tried to grab them like as soon as the matchups were announced. And I had Copenhagen, they were a 1.5 goal underdog with actually plus odds. So all the juice and then some on the Manchester City side. That number has since climbed to 1 3/4. Probably not completely unexpected considering the return of Erling Haaland, among other things. But Manchester City is starting to look like they might be back to where they had been after kind of a slower start to the English Premier League season. Plus, they had that Club World Cup and put them a match day behind because they had a game postponed that did throw off the schedules a little bit. But Manchester City, to me, they weren't that dominant in this competition. I thought Red Bull Leipzig were in great position to win either of the two matches that they played, and Manchester City took them both. But that doesn't really matter now. Manchester City won their group, got to face probably the weakest of all second place sides. But Copenhagen at home in that first leg are going to do their best to try to keep this as low scoring possible and try to take an advantage to the Etihad in Manchester. And we'll see if they can make that happen. I think there's a fairly good chance that this will hit 2. I imagine there'll be plenty of buyback or it might be a lot of Manchester City money coming in, and there might even be some that might be trying to game this number to push it to 2, then to buy it back on Copenhagen. So you could have had a Manchester City -1.5 and a Copenhagen +2, which would be nice if it fell to you'd win one fully and push the other. It doesn't really happen too often in soccer betting from what I've seen, but that's one way to do it. Feels like a lot of risk for getting a really good number of Manchester City, a goal and a half. I think most people would take that right now. But with that said, I think Copenhagen, they're going to be clearly as defensive as possible. Manchester City are going to try to score as many goals as they can, try to end this tie here on the road. But I think it's going to be a lot harder than you would expect, just based on the huge dichotomy or discrepancy between transfer budgets or even just player values budgets on both of these clubs. So I'm tempted to, I mean, most of these Champions League matches, I mean, I kind of go into cup ties, thinking that they're going to be a lot closer than a lot of times the experts predict. That's where a lot of big upsets are. I'm certainly not calling one in this matchup, and I'll get probably towards the end of the show, I'll go through the Champions League to advanced numbers. I want to get through the daily match first legs, I guess, first on this episode. But and then we'll get to the futures at the end. But I think Manchester City, I mean, they look great, but they also kind of struggled with Everton. And that was Erling Haaland's second match back, I think, in the starting lineup. I just haven't been very impressed with Manchester City for a lot of this season. Of course, they have the best manager in the world. They're not as deep as probably they'd like to be, but they have so much talent. And Phil Foden has been so great lately, filling in for a lot of people. Kevin De Bruyne is back playing as well, starting from the jump, or from that opening kickoff. So Manchester City are, I mean, I think they're still not in full form. They haven't rounded to full form just yet. This would certainly be a good chance to do it, because ultimately the English Premier League sides that spend a lot of money on their players, they don't defend Manchester City very well. So a much lower budgeted FC Copenhagen, yes, winners of Denmark, but big questions about how well they can defend. I think until we see a +2 on Copenhagen, I'm not sure that that'll be something I'm interested in from a sides perspective. But I think pretty much from a total. I mean, I love the push on 3. I think that's valuable. It hasn't really mattered too much in the English Premier League lately, unfortunately. But I feel like there's been so many goals in that league, and I don't really think it's a result of great offense. It feels like a lot of the Bundesliga from early in the season. But that's certainly responded, and we've seen a big reversion of the mean in goals in Germany since then. But in terms of this, I guess, level, the nice part is that most teams, when they fall behind, they're going to come out because they want to get a draw or to try to somehow win a match, and there's no value. There's no difference in losing 2-0 as there is to 5-0, essentially. But in the first leg of a 2-legged tie, that's very different here. And so I expect that there's going to be some interest even when Copenhagen fall behind. That's certainly, I don't think I'm going out on a limb on saying we should expect that to happen. And I think really I think my biggest question ultimately is, will Copenhagen score? If they can score, then you probably want to play that side as opposed to the total. But I think for the most part, I'm very interested in under 3, as I think Copenhagen down 1-0. I mean, they probably wouldn't love it going to Manchester City down a goal and having to change that around. But at the same time, I think they're in pretty good shape to be as defensive as possible. I don't think they come out until they're really far behind, and that probably means the side and total are very much in danger / have already lost. So I think Copenhagen play a really defensive brand of football here. It's a different team and different style that Manchester City have to get used to. They're the best team probably in the world, favorites to win this competition. But I'll put Copenhagen under 3 on my list as a possibility for that first matchup on tomorrow, Tuesday. In that same window, we have Red Bull Leipzig hosting Real Madrid in Eastern Germany. Leipzig, a quarter goal underdog at home, with a little bit more juice on the home team. Over under here is 3, juiced all the way to under. And in terms of where this number has moved, so we had Leipzig initially a quarter goal underdog, and there's been some money bet on them. And it's been, I guess, trending that way since I had Leipzig initially written down as a quarter goal underdog with getting odds. Now they're a little bit more juice on their side than the Real Madrid one. So that's likely as a result of Jude Bellingham's injury, and looks like he's absent. Though Marco Olsa, the manager for Leipzig, essentially said, "I don't believe he's not playing until the match whistle is blown and he's not on the pitch." But it seems pretty cautious, or at least I think it's not going out on a limb to say that we're not expecting Jude Bellingham. And he's been such an incredible goal scorer for Real Madrid, who came into this year really worried about not having a striker. They haven't really missed one. Yes, they'd been a lot better if they had had one, if Karim Benzema was still putting goals in. I feel like Joselu Mata has been pretty good in a kind of substitutes type of role. But what I think pulling Jude Bellingham out of that team, what that really does here is it makes it, because he's just the undefendable center midfielder, essentially center attacking midfield, who makes these deep runs and late runs. And ultimately, everyone is always worried about the strikers because those are the ones in the front lines. But then it's really hard to track that second one. He, I think, does a really good job of fitting in between and making the center backs not really know, especially with two center backs. They're not really sure who to defend and who to really take. It's a little bit different of a setup for Leipzig. I would expect them to play three center backs as they have for no matter really who the manager has been the last few seasons. And I feel like we've seen a lot of that under Marco Rose as well. There's plenty of concerns on the Leipzig side. Yes, they're a much lower budgeted team. Most of their players are there for exposure and then to get sold to somewhere bigger. And that's kind of part of the game. Javi Simmons on loan from PSG was a surprise, but they had so much, I guess, front line talent. They didn't necessarily think they needed him, and perfect for him to kind of explode and to potentially go back to PSG once Kylian Mbappe leaves for Real Madrid next year. But I think Leipzig, I mean, they've had a really tough time. This year has not gone easily for them. I was pretty bullish on them coming into the season and felt like they could kind of take Dortmund's position to challenge Bayern Munchen in German Bundesliga, but that hasn't really happened. A lot because they used to dominate at home, beat everyone there, and score a ton of goals. Now they haven't really been doing either of those. They've been struggling a lot in Bundesliga, and especially after the 2024 calendar switch or Christmas break. They lost Forsberg to Red Bull New York, but he wasn't a huge important piece, maybe in the locker room, I guess you could argue. But the team just hasn't been performing very well. And I think there's some concern, at least from my perspective, that maybe Leipzig is not as strong. And this is a pretty good draw for Real Madrid to get one of the weaker teams from Germany, potentially. And considering the way that Leipzig have played. Now, they got a great group, finished second, though I mentioned earlier on this podcast, they had a couple chances, I felt, to really beat Manchester City and had leads or were in position to take them, and really kind of crumbled towards the end. You could point to potentially a depth issue being a big problem there. And Real Madrid are pretty strong and pretty deep, but they've also got a lot of issues themselves. So speaking about Red Bull Leipzig, the way they want to play, they want to drum really fast counterattacks and just go as soon as they turn you over. They clog the middle of the field and try to make their opponents use the flanks. Now, Leipzig want to create on the left flank with David Raum, who's a German international, but he doesn't really defend, and that's a concern for me. Though I would expect Vinny Jr., though he does seem to switch sides, that he usually likes to be on the left. So, which would be against Leipzig's right. So that's a little bit better of a scenario. But I imagine Leipzig with the expectations of Real Madrid, one of the biggest, if not the biggest club in the world, most famous, blah, 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 Champions League dominance in the last few seasons as well. I think there's a good chance that Leipzig are going to try to play a conservative game here. I think that makes me a little bit more interested in under 3, especially without Bellingham, because Vinny Jr. has been awesome and was so good at Girona, but they were essentially in a counterattacking mode from the beginning, Real Madrid were. And I think that a lot of that was to also protect their center backs, which they had Tchouaméni and Carvajal, who basically neither are center backs traditionally, playing center back, and didn't work very well when it was Nacho and Carvajal against Atletico Madrid the week before that. But they are off a really good result. Leipzig off a disappointing draw. I feel like there's plenty of concern for both of these clubs coming into this one, especially Real Madrid's side. I mean, it feels like their concern really is about injury and Jude Bellingham, but they're pretty much now have La Liga in a snare at this point with Barcelona way behind, Girona looking like a Cinderella now, and Real Madrid were the one to do that. So they're in pretty good shape. Just injuries are a concern, center backs and Bellingham, as I mentioned. Leipzig just haven't been playing very well. So a quarter of a goal on a home team that hasn't been playing well feels like nowhere near enough. And maybe there's a lot of value in a German night being a lot colder than you'd see in Madrid, though I don't think the weather in Madrid has been that balmy, to say the least. And it's going to be a tough trip, and Real Madrid essentially have to go win without their star goal scorer. But to me, I mean, Bellingham's a huge loss, but there's so much talent in this Real Madrid side, and I just don't know that I've seen enough from Leipzig to really believe that a quarter of a goal is a sufficient amount, because they need to win this match to win you a full bet. Now, I'm not too proud. I certainly wouldn't complain with a half a unit victory if they drew at home, and that would certainly be great for the spectacle and keeping this interesting for the second leg. But I think there's a fairly good chance Real Madrid goes to Leipzig into a stadium that hasn't really been rocking or hasn't been as dominant this season, and getting a result and potentially even winning. So I think I'm more interested here in the under, as I think no Bellingham is a big deal. I also feel like Carvajal or whatever is happening in the center defense for Real Madrid, that will be something that they're concerned about and will probably be set up to protect, at least to a certain degree, maybe not as much as they were against Girona. But that was at home. So I would think they would be even more conservative away. And so I want to see what Real Madrid have inside. Now, Leipzig certainly could follow that Atletico Madrid playbook and just go after those center backs with a bunch of crosses into the box. Atleti really struggled to finish and put their crosses on net, but they had a lot of opportunities. I just don't know that Leipzig's offense is really built for that. So they wanted to, like I said earlier, turn you over and then use their pace and get up the pitch. That worked really well with Timo Werner, but he was put on loan to Tottenham Hotspur. I think were questions because he didn't play a lot this season. Supposedly it was due to injury, but I wonder if that's more of a Leipzig choice. But ultimately, Benjamin Šeško is a young striker. I don't really trust him as much in the air. I feel like that's not, yes, he's gotten headed goals. I think he even got one this past weekend, but I just don't really think that's like his game. He's not an Olivier Giroud, to say the least, just yet. Luis Openda, who's signed from Racing Club de Lens in France, he's been really talented, scoring a ton of goals, but he doesn't seem like he has a ton of pace. So to me, it seems like Leipzig are going to have to find some goals in really great individual moments. Real Madrid are so good defensively. That midfield's ancient at times if it's Kroos and Modric, but ultimately they're really talented in a lot of different ways, but they also play great defense and they're really good at not giving their opponent easy chances. And that's what I think has made Real Madrid the La Liga favorite for the season and has made them so dominant in Champions League, because they're built for this format. Just don't give up a lot of chances to the other side, and you have so much talent. Just let Vinny Jr. get it out on his own, and he'll probably take you to promised land. So I think for Tuesday, my interest is on both these matches under 3. I feel like they're pretty big totals. I understand with Manchester City, though, it feels like there's going to be very little to be expected from Copenhagen at home. And then on the Leipzig side, I mean, it's really how strong is their home field advantage? To me, not as strong as it has been. How big is the absence of Jude Bellingham, really? And I feel like there's probably more here because this should be a much more equal matchup. Copenhagen are going to be using their crowd as much as they can. They're going to be like gasping for air pretty much this whole match. But I do feel like there's more of a chance for Leipzig to score a goal than there is for the other home team in Copenhagen. But Real Madrid, I feel like, are going to be a lot more of a makeshift offense, trying to figure out exactly how to perform without Jude Bellingham. So I think that's really the thought process that you go through about which one am I going to pick as my best bet for the potential ultimate best bet coming end of show. I'm gonna go with that Copenhagen under 3, though. I guess my thing here is just backing the home team that is going to be set up in a very defensive type of manner. Now that can certainly go badly at times. We've seen it in a lot of the big leagues across domestic football, but I think betting against a Manchester City side that have not been playing with their best pieces all together. I think that means something. And I think there's potentially going to see, I mean, based on the spread right now, maybe it's a little bit juiced to over, whereas the Real Madrid side, I think we might even lose this 3. So it might be something you want to grab sooner rather than later. Move now to Wednesday. And like I said, I'll come through at the end of the show and go through all of the two advanced numbers, but I'm going to cover all the spreads for each of the matches, courtesy of BetOnline. As I mentioned already, there's a link in the podcast description if you're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or on YouTube that you can click, follow, and then go get some bonuses from the casinos. PSG are at home for Real Sociedad on Wednesday, February 14th, Valentine's Day here in the United States. A great holiday to buy your significant other some flowers or chocolates and have them arrive dead or not arrive or something like that. So be careful. Make sure you use someone that you trust, because I've learned the hard way with that one. But PSG currently a 3/4 goal favorite, Real Sociedad, with all the juice on the PSG side. Over under here is 2.5, and it's juiced a little bit to under. So in terms of movement, where we've been since I was tracking this, so I initially made Real Sociedad a 1-goal underdog. We haven't gotten to that number yet. They've actually taken some money. This number's dropped a little bit. I don't know if that's I guess it did get to 1 and it came back to 3/4 a goal. Excuse me. I think there's a fairly good chance that we might get back there just based on Real Sociedad's struggles ever since AFCON and the Asian Cup started. Now, most, if not all of their players are back, but they've also sustained a lot of injuries and have had a ton of matches with Copa del Rey playing as well. I feel like they've held their own, have, I think, been better than a lot of people would have expected, but they haven't certainly lived up to expectations according to the lines they've been receiving. I think I've made some or taken advantage of some of that, not as much as I'd like to. Just there haven't been a lot of goals in Real Sociedad matches really for a lot of the season. They were very impressive, won their group, and then got pretty much the worst draw possible. It could have had Copenhagen. Instead, they get PSG. Brutal for a group of death runner up, but I guess that's how this game works. I think from a Real Sociedad's perspective, they're going to go and try to keep this as low scoring as possible and try to give themselves a chance at the Real Arena the next time, the second leg, whenever that will happen, this competition. PSG on the other side, I mean, this is the competition that they're playing for. They rested Mbappe this weekend. They didn't start Donnarumma, their goalkeeper. Like, they were using a skeleton squad and fell behind early to Lille, but that didn't seem to matter too much to them. And ultimately, I don't even think they used Mbappe. So they're in pretty good shape in terms of rest. Real Sociedad on the other side, I think, kind of went with a similar type of choice and sat some players like Mikel Merino didn't start, their important center midfielder. So it should be two teams that are maybe about as equal on rest. I think I'd probably lean to PSG, and they're at home with the Parc des Princes, which is really hard for anyone to go into. And then Real Sociedad, unfortunately, are dealing with injuries. Like their captain, Mikel Oyarzabal, has been hurt. And I don't know that he's been great for them, but there is a bit of a drop off to the remainder of those teams. And I think remainder of the players in that team, I just feel like when I'm looking at this one, I don't know that there's enough here for me to want to back Real Sociedad. Pretty big underdog. Maybe if it hits +1 again, and then we get a decent juice, or even just +1, so you have an insurance on a single goal loss, that's certainly valuable. Maybe that's my number to get some interest. I think at 3/4, there's enough there that I just don't really think that's enough for me, unless we see a Real Sociedad offense that suddenly is filled with all these players that haven't really been playing together for a while, and I expect them to suddenly to play well. That's the problem when Takefusa Kubo goes and plays with Japan in the Asian Cup that was rescheduled from a summer event to middle of winter in Qatar, because that's the only time they could do it, just similar to our World Cup a few seasons ago, or maybe last year if they all run together at this point. I just think PSG are much stronger, and probably my biggest interest here is Real Sociedad playing well and controlling tempo and really reducing the amount of goal opportunities, goals, or shots on target. And really that pushes me towards under again. I think Sociedad, they haven't really shown that they can score much. And I feel like they're also in a position where with leg 2 at home, they don't want this to get out of hand. So I think their probably best idea here is to potentially try to keep this as low scoring possible, put a stall out and try to control the ball and keep it away from PSG. Now, it does play a little bit into PSG's hands because they love to counterattack. I think that's the design that they used to have, but it's been a little bit different under Luis Enrique, their newest of new managers. There's multiples every season, it seems, but he's been in the job. They're doing pretty well in Liga. Still don't really look like they're going to be challenged by anyone else in the league. So that's good for them and really allows them to focus solely on Champions League, which I think they'd do anyway, because they'd expect to even overturn a deficit if they had one in Liga. But I think with under 2.5 is probably my biggest interest here until we get a +1 Real Sociedad. And even then, I feel like I'm still a little bit nervous because we haven't seen Sociedad's offense doing much in a while. And part of why they won their group is, I think, a goalless draw with Inter. So they're probably going to go try to. A 1-0 loss would not be good for Real Sociedad, of course, but that would give them a chance where they know they'll be playing at home. And if it goes to extra time, they'll have that home crowd behind them if they can equalize. So to me, that under 2.5 is my biggest interest there. Move next to Lazio, and they're hosting Bayern Munchen. Currently, Lazio a 3/4 goal underdog at home to Bayern. Over under here is 2 3/4, which is pretty heavily to under. Now, in terms of where this number has moved, I'll tell you right now as soon as I pull it up. So Lazio initially a 1-goal underdog. That number has been falling, maybe as a result of Bayern Munchen's match and struggles with Bayern Leverkusen this past weekend. Though Lazio have not looked very good, to say the least. Haven't really scored a ton of goals this year. Ciro Immobile, their star striker, like talisman, like I think just scored his 200th goal, but he, to me, doesn't seem like the most important striker on the team. That seems like Tati Castellanos, formerly of Girona in New York City FC, Argentine. I don't know necessarily if that's caused some friction and potentially is maybe explaining why Lazio have been playing great, but they've got a very defensive manager in Maurizio Sarri, formerly of Juventus, and I'm sure another million other stops in Italy and other places across the world. But I think that's exactly what you need to be against Bayern. You need to have defensive solidity, but you also need to threaten them with your offense. Now, Lazio haven't really done a ton of that. They, to me, I mean, it's kind of Bayern Munich, I guess, is a little bit different for Germany because most of the Italian clubs would probably be more wealthy and able to spend than I think a lot of the German ones. But Bayern are a much different squad value. They call them Bayern for a reason because they buy most of their opponents' best players in Germany. Doesn't so work as well on the international or continental stage, but clearly installed as a really big favorite. Now, initially we had this open at +1. It's fallen through 1 3/4, which is pretty respectful of Lazio. I do feel like if you're playing Lazio here, you probably want a +1. The juice certainly indicates it'll probably hit 1 before it hit a half of a goal. Though I think if the marketplace was that strongly betting Lazio, you might want to get involved with that. Total here at 2 3/4 is about where it's been this whole time. It had a bit of it was always juiced the under pretty heavily, then got a little bit of I guess money coming in on the over, but we're back to about where I've been tracking it. I was expecting a 3 here, so it's a little bit below what I was expecting, and I just don't know how to play unders with Bayern Munchen. They'll probably be content with a road victory, but probably nothing less than that. I don't think Bayern are in any situation where they're accepting of a draw. I think that means they'll play a lot more aggressively, and that will certainly put their back line under a little bit of peril, which is not really a great scenario considering that's a big problem for Bayern ultimately pretty much everywhere. Now, Lazio, they certainly are a very talented team in Serie A in Italy and should be able to threaten Bayern. But when I think of their lineup, I'm just not really sure where the threats really come from. They've got some pace with Pedro, but he's pretty old at this point. Felipe Anderson, I don't know that I trust him too much, even if he got on the score sheet recently. Like I said, with the striker, Ciro Immobile versus Tati Castellanos. I feel like Lazio, I mean, they will park the bus if they take a lead. They are 100. It's like Juventus and Lazio are the most park the bus teams in maybe the world, but definitely in Italy. They want to take a lead and win 1-0. That's like the dream scenario for them. I think that type of match would fit really well for Lazio. But Bayern are going to try to run rampant. They're the visiting Marauders, and they don't really care about how many goals they allow because they know they're going to outscore you. And for that reason, I think I'm pretty concerned with taking an under here, especially not getting that push on 3 as we have that in both of the Tuesday matches. And I think, honestly, I'm probably not interested in Lazio until I get that full goal of insurance, though you do only lose half your bet if they lost by a single goal right here with a three-quarters of a goal type of price next to their name. So I don't know necessarily that I'm going to change and go deeper into this one, or I mean, we'll see what happens with line movement and such. I just don't think the total is good enough for me. So I think for the ultimate best bet portion of this show, which I'll do at the end so I can keep you guys all sticking around. I think I'll put Lazio getting three-quarters of a goal on my list. But I'm really waiting for some potential movement there, to say the least. So I'll now move to the next matches. Then I'll close it all up at the end with discussion on the two advanced numbers. But I want to quickly get through the other prices that are out there, just to get maybe a heads up or a jump on potentially next week. So we'll start with PSV Eindhoven, Dutch club hosting Borussia Dortmund, and that. I was surprised. I expected Dortmund to potentially be favored. They were so good in the Champions League, have not been very good in the German Bundesliga. But interesting enough, Eindhoven currently a quarter goal favorite, always have been since I've been tracking this one. We're as high as a half a goal favorite initially. That's come in a little bit, and they're now a quarter goal favorite. Actually, what am I talking about? Sorry, I'm looking at Feyenoord. My bad. Let me start this over. So I don't have editing capabilities. So sorry. So initial number that I had. So, okay. I made PSV a quarter goal underdog with a total around 2.5 here. And that was the initial number. But since I guess based on Dortmund's struggles, despite really starting the German Bundesliga second half really well with some wins over the bottom dwellers or cellar dwellers of the Bundesliga in Germany. But the line's flipped, and that says something to me that there's been a fair amount of people that were betting PSV Eindhoven, giving them a really good chance to get through. And they're going to have a dominant crowd. Borussia Dortmund will come back at them with one of their own. So this should be a pretty, like, if you're judging by home field advantages, this is a pretty even matchup potentially. I feel like the Dutch don't get a lot of credit on the continental stage, but they have incredible crowds. And I think someone was mentioned on one of the German broadcasts this weekend that they didn't really like the Dutch techno that's going to be played during the game or right before the game, and really every break they can. So I feel like from an Eindhoven perspective, I mean, their market's giving them a better chance than and that it's very interesting to me that they moved from a quarter goal underdog to a favorite. But that happens. And total here is 2 3/4. She's very heavily to over. So I guess I was selling short the offenses on this one. I feel like PSV, they're one of the teams I picked to advance out of the group stage. I think I'd pick both PSV and Feyenoord. I struggle with their colors are very similar to separate them mentally. But it does feel like the bigger name here, Dortmund, are an underdog, and I would imagine that will be the popular side, though there's a little bit more juice in the Eindhoven side right now. So to me, that tells me the market does like PSV Eindhoven in this matchup, and this certainly on Tuesday, the 20th of February. But I am a little bit curious about that because I don't know that PSV were that great in the group stages. Dortmund did about all you could ask for. And then, but they're pretty much priced as equals right now with a quarter goal. That's the normal number that I give for home field advantage. Maybe PSV Eindhoven deserve a little bit more than that for what should be a really big Dutch crowd. And so maybe they are saying that Dortmund is a little bit better than Eindhoven with this number. But over and under 2 3/4 looks like we'll probably get to 3 before this kicks off next week. And I'll be interested to see kind of what happens to Dortmund in between, because I feel like they are just so fickle, and their highs are very high and their lows are very low. And we'll see how their performance in the Bundesliga this weekend, how that impacts where this number will move. But I guess my initial interest is on the Dortmund side, and I feel like I've done very well with Dortmund unders in the Champions League because they really haven't played very well offensively, and their defense has been much better than it has been in the Bundesliga. Maybe because they're a little bit more conservative and a little bit more pragmatic in this competition versus the German Bundesliga, where they know they need to win every match. Move next to the, I guess, same window, but Inter Milan hosting Atletico Madrid. Geez, that was difficult for me to say. But Inter, a half a goal favorite with more juice, over just 2 1/4, juiced all the way to over. So maybe we get 2.5 here. And this is a big test for Atletico Madrid. The line's about exactly what I made it, half a goal underdog on the road. Total I had between 2 1/4 and 2.5. So Pretty much to be expected. Don't see a ton of value here, but I'm not really a variance person, so that's not really kind of my game. But Inter, they've been taking care of business in Italy and probably should be able to do that against Atletico Madrid here. Atleti, being a group winner, though, gets to play at home in the second leg. They've been markedly worse away from home than they've been at home. But I don't know if their success at the Wanda Metropolitano has been really the same over the last few weeks. They've been playing a ton of matches where their trip to Saudi Arabia and then also the Copa del Rey in midweek. So I think this is a good spot for Inter to potentially get a victory. Though I do feel like Atleti go on the road. If they take a lead, they try to kill this game. If they don't take lead, they try to kill this game. Basically, they try to keep this as low scoring as possible and return to the capital of Spain to potentially try to improve on a goalless draw that first leg. I think that's the goal here. So I like under 2.25, and especially like it more if it climbs to 2.5. We'll move to Wednesday, and then I'll do the to advance, I guess, discussion, and then I'll go ultimate best bet and get out of here. So thank you. If you're not a member of my Patreon yet, check it out, patreon.com/the_real_G Warner. You would have gotten Texas Tech tonight, -2, close 3.5. Put that out for my subscribers. So go check that out, patreon.com/the_real_G Warner. Very affordable price. You get all my plays, leans, write-ups, everything that I do. And if you download the application, you can even get a notification when I lock something in, so you can get exactly the same price that I'm getting, instead of having to make sure you check something or hope you get something on time, et cetera, et cetera. I think most of my patrons would tell you that I'm trying to be as upfront and telling everyone what's happening as possible. Trying to get leans out every night so you can have a good idea of where I'm going the next day, and can even use that to make your own decisions if you want to lock in some numbers before I tell you to lock them in. But thank you for all the subscribers there, and I really appreciate that. So this last, I guess, match day, or I guess the last day of matches in the Champions League knockout rounds, so at least the first legs I'll go through. Then we'll do the futures discussion, then get out of there with the ultimate best bet. But Napoli hosts Barcelona. Currently, Napoli at pick'em with a little bit more juice at home. Over unders 2.75. Used to split both ways. Not a lot to say here about movement either. Pretty much a little money is coming to Napoli, though that could be because Barcelona's really been kind of out of sorts. But maybe we'll find some way to kind of revitalize their team once Xavi announced that he was going to step down at the end of the season. Napoli just haven't really been very good this year, but they've had extremely high expectations after winning the Scudetto last season, the Serie A Italian champions. And they haven't been able to score goals. Victor Osimhen was still at the AFCON in the finals for Nigeria on Sunday. So luckily, this match will take place in the next midweek, so that potentially makes him available here. Gotta imagine he might not start or play the weekend in Italian Serie A, but should probably be available here, because I think anyone that you play against Barcelona in the knockouts of the Champions League, you're going to make yourself available. I feel like until we get a little bit of a spread here, I'm not that interested in backing Napoli as a pick'em. Now, I think Barcelona are under really big threat to get knocked out of this competition. I think Napoli are inferior, but I went to the stadium earlier this season. It wasn't that crazy, but it can be at times, and I imagine for Barcelona it will be, though I was there for AC Milan. I figured it would be a lot crazier than it was, but it is what it is, I guess. I just think Barcelona, they haven't really done much this year for them to get this type of credit. I mean, it's basically saying they're better on a neutral, which you probably could say. But if Napoli are catching some odds as a pick'em, I think that'd be something of interest to me. And total here at 2.75, I think Napoli are an under team because they're still getting a lot of respect for an offense that hasn't really been around. Kvaratskhelia has not been the same. Victor Osimhen's barely played. So maybe when they get those two together and firing, they turn back to the offense that they were when they were probably the best team in Europe, dominating Champions League last season as well, until pretty much the winter break, and then things started to go downhill. But they had such a big lead in Italy that it didn't seem to matter. I don't know necessarily where to go with this one, but at least we have a week to figure out where the lines end up moving. And last but not least, before I get into the futures discussion, we have FC Porto. They're a 3/4 goal underdog with all the juice at home to Arsenal. Over under here is 2.5. Just a little bit to under. I was pretty disappointed with Porto this season in Champions League. I felt like they were in good position to take points or beat Barcelona, but I think really in both occasions, but didn't really do as much as I thought they would, and finished second in the group. And unfortunately, their punishment is having to face Arsenal, one of the biggest favorites in this competition. Arsenal, I mean, they've had some really good showings, like the Liverpool win a couple weekends ago, though ultimately there wasn't a lot in it because an own goal put it 1-1 with like the 80th minute. If not for another big mistake by another central defender, maybe they don't get that win, and maybe we're thinking of them differently. I think Porto are going to be, I mean, Portuguese, the La Liga Portugal has done really, really well. And I feel like they are a team that I trust. They've done well in this competition. And I think they're going to give Arsenal a ton of trouble. Now, it feels like there's a fair amount of respect here, seeing Porto only three-quarter goal underdog. Looks like that's actually even gotten more juice. It looks like they were three quarters fairly juiced, then actually moved to down to a half of a goal underdog at home, and then back to three quarters now, and it's very juiced at the moment, more juice. So potentially we are going to jockey between that half and that three quarters. I think if you're into Porto, I think you try to take that three quarters if you can get either this minus 123 at BetOnline right now, or just a decent juice, because that'll end up putting you in a pretty good position to lose by a single goal at home and still not lose your full risk. Only half of what you put out there would lose in that situation because you get half your bet at +1. But I think under 2.5 is also interesting. I think Arsenal's really struggled to score against low blocks. I think Porto are going to play pretty defensively, and they are fortunately one of those Portuguese sides that can play defensively, but then can spring counterattacks and have some talent up top. So I'm pretty interested in the Porto side, and in that first leg, and also under as well. So now it's time to get to the futures discussion, because I try to find usually some good value, just big name teams that are overvalued in terms of their two advanced numbers. I think I was against Manchester United and against Barcelona last year in the Europa League, and that worked fairly well. We'll start with FC Copenhagen, a 13-1 odds to get through over Manchester City, who are minus 5,000. So $5,000 wagers would win you 100. That number has jumped significantly, maybe because Holland came back. It hasn't jumped so much. Unfortunately, there's huge spreads here, huge margin, huge handle. But I think you'll find that at any sports book, unfortunately. But I had as low as Manchester City minus 1250. It's climbed to minus 5,000. That's an incredible, like, kind of ridiculous type of jump. But I guess that's kind of how it goes, maybe, in this type of thing. So that's probably not where the value is, I'll put it that way. But I guess that's how it goes, unfortunately. Move next to, I don't really give Copenhagen much of a chance. They're going to have to get a win in that first leg, because I doubt they're going to do anything at Manchester City. But I mean, crazy things have happened. I think that would be probably the upset of Champions League, though, if it occurred. Probably more interesting to talk about on Tuesday is Leipzig, and they're hosting Real Madrid. So that number's been moving around very slightly. We had Leipzig initially at plus 235. They're now plus 250. So $100 will win you 250. Real Madrid have taken some money on minus 300, so 1-3 on, but they've also only climbed 25 cents. That's with losing to minus 325, and that's with Jude Bellingham being absent. So to me, I don't know that there's a lot there. I wish Leipzig were playing a lot better for me to trust them more, because that injury is going to impact Real Madrid, no doubt. But I think it might push me towards under in that first matchup, and potentially in the second one as well, more so than expecting Leipzig to kind of turn around their home form, which has been really, really sad for a lot of the season. Moving to Wednesday of this week, I guess the tie begins with PSG and Real Sociedad. We have PSG at minus 180 favorite, so $180 will win you 100. Real Sociedad plus 145, so 100 will bring back 145 plus your risk. I think this is an interesting potential for Real Sociedad as an underdog here. My big question, though, is how healthy are they, and what does that starting lineup look like? So it's probably not something I can make a call on until Wednesday. But that's certainly some. Basically, I mean, no one, wrestlers that were picked were, all right, the odds were that they would finish third in their group behind Benfica of Portugal and also Inter Milan. Well, I took them to advance, wish they'd take them to win the group, but I'm happy that I got my plus money on that. But they won the group, knocked out Inter Milan, deserved, I think, more than two draws against them. So They've shown that they can play, and they've shown that they are capable. And PSG have melted down against inferior sides before, so lean to the dog there for sure. Next, go to Lazio, an 8-1 underdog to move on against Bayern München. Bayern's minus 1,500, so I guess 1 to 15 on. Pretty big gap there as well. And that number's climbed significantly. Lazio from 6-1 up to this 8-1 number. Bayern München from minus 1,000, minus 1,500. So more significant of a move there. But I think Lazio, I mean, their goal is try to keep this as low scoring as possible. They want to win this first leg. And then if you think they can do that, you might even want to sprinkle a little bit on that 8-1, because if they can win that first leg and then go to Munich and try their best to keep the ball from finding the back of their net. But they're going to have a lot of chances against a high line that Bayern might. I mean, the nice part with Thomas Tuchel, I guess, for if you're a Bayern supporter, is that they're a lot stronger defensively than the other managers who just didn't really care about defense. But Nagelsmann, I mean, his defenses weren't so bad for Leipzig, so I'm not really sure what to say there. Big price, but it's unfortunately this round feels pretty lopsided from the first place finishers facing the second or the runner-ups. Moving to Wednesday of this week, we have or excuse me, Tuesday of next week is the better way to do it. That's when this tie starts. We have PSV a plus 105 underdog, and they start at home, which you could argue that maybe it's worth taking a little stab at the home team if they get a good result that first leg, and if nothing really happens, you could probably that will certainly impact the pricing for before the second leg for a 2 advanced number, but it might, give you a decent chance to take a position on someone. And that number's come down. PSV initially, when I put this down, was a plus 130. So $100 will win you 130. That's dropped 23.81% to plus 105. So that's pretty significant. Dortmund on the other side have moved from minus 160 down to minus 128. So, that certainly, I think, goes alongside with PSV and the belief that, we've seen it in the number that they went from an underdog to a favorite at home. But this price, I mean, does suggest this is more of a coin flip than any we've talked about so far. And I think PSV with a great home field advantage, I mean, it might be worth it taking a stab that they have a good first result and maybe you come back. I mean, that would, if you want to do a type of hedging technique, but if PSV have a good result and the Dortmund are trailing or somehow behind going home, then you could probably get a plus money on Dortmund even at home, and then I guess cash the in between on whoever wins. But I guess the drawback though is if PSV do not win at home, that price climbs for Dortmund because they will be certainly highly favored to win at home against PSV and what would be a deciding second leg. And it would all be decided on the Dortmund pitch, unfortunately. And the 2 advanced numbers do survive into extra time. So that's something you want to think about if you're potentially backing a team that will be on the road for leg 2. Next, we'll go to Inter. They're against Atletico Madrid. Currently, Inter at home for the first leg. They're a minus 140 favorite, which is climbed from minus 125. So some money out there flowing in on the Italian Giants, who've been the best team in Italy, and I don't see a real reason to potentially see them as struggling here. But Atletico Madrid, they're good. They've dropped from let's see, they climbed from minus 105 initially to plus 115. So there's been a fair amount of money coming in Inter to make that move, but I think you could argue that Atleti have been so banged up and just so limited and kind of gassed lately. Some questions about how available their best players will be, and they have to start on the road at San Siro against a really in-form Inter team who probably should win at home. So that's, I guess, if you think Atleti can get a result on the road, then that would be certainly a number that's worth looking at, is that 2 advanced number. And last but not least, the matchups or the ties that start on Wednesday of next week, the 21st of February. We'll start with Napoli. They're a plus 175 underdog, up from plus 138. A 21% increase. Barcelona from minus 170 to minus 225. It shouldn't surprise me or you or anybody listening to this or thinking about this. Just Barcelona gets bet. That's what happens, whether they deserve it or not, really. And I feel like on the Napoli side, I mean, it's really important that they get Osimhen in a lineup. If that occurs, I feel like that plus 175 probably drops a little bit if he's starting for this match day, and he should be. By any means necessary, I think, or potentially put him out there unless he's banged up or too out of form, or I don't know how that happens if he's playing soccer matches and not on a beach somewhere and then comes back from Qatar to Italy. I don't see how that's so different, but I guess I'll leave that to the odds makers. I think Napoli plus 175, considering all the drama go around Barcelona, that does interest me as well. And last but not least, I guess we'll have Porto, a 4-1 underdog to Arsenal right now, who are minus 600, 1-6 on, or 6-1 on. And so Arsenal have climbed from minus 500 to minus 600, to 17% increase. Porto have climbed from plus 360 to plus 400, so a 10% increase. There you see some of the margin the sports books are holding. Um, but I think Porto are relatively, I mean, it's hard to say how much better Arsenal is than Porto, or Arsenal are than Porto. That's a big question. But I think Porto, just based on their setup and based on how they'll play, I mean, that's probably the biggest long shot that I'm interested in. I guess Lazio is a little bit of interest as well. That's another big one. I don't think Copenhagen really comes close to making the cut for me, really. But Porto 4-1, I mean, it probably climbs because a lot of the marketplace is determined by money coming in from the UK. Maybe based on how valuable the pound is over there or something like that. But I imagine Arsenal will get bet, and we still probably see a better Porto number before these all kick off. So that's I guess the futures outlook. Nothing that I'm locking in right yet, but stay tuned. If you remember my Patreon, you'll get all that information as soon as I have it, of course. If you're on pregame as well, I'll try to include that in the daily packages that are going out. And if you want to get in touch with me some way, slide in the DMs, the real underscore G Warner, Instagram, Patreon, Twitter, or YouTube, and I'll find a way to get back at you. So I think it's now time for the ultimate best bet. Before we get there, thank you for all the supporters, patrons, and everything like that. If you could leave a 5-star review on this podcast network, Betting the Pitch on Spotify or on Apple Podcasts, it would be huge because that gets me more. If I'm up higher up the search rankings, I think it's more random listeners and potentially more shows that I do. Because if there's more people out there that need or are absorbing or watching or listening to the content, then I got a much bigger reason to go out there and put it. So go throw some decent five. I don't really want a review if it's not a 5-star, so I'll put that out there. But I know if you've been listening to me for this long, listen to me ramble and make bad jokes to myself, then please go rate us a 5-star review. That'd be huge. And also, we got other stuff. We just finished the NFL season, had an awesome playoffs. Very thankful for the NFL playoffs, as I am pretty much every year. Still kind of amazed that the Chiefs won that Super Bowl, but that's what Patrick Mahomes does seem to do. But now that show's rolling off, I have good news. We'll be doing a baseball podcast. I have another friend of mine coming on, and we will have details for that sooner rather than later. Still doing a pregame.com college basketball podcast with AJ Hoffman. Plus, we have the college basketball betting the pitch version, the Need for Seeds podcast with Big East Ben that I'm doing every Friday. We're talking about potentially adding a midweek episode, but the drama is that there's not really an easy way to do that because really there's not always a ton of great games, and they're spread out across the week. So when do we record, when do we put it out, all that sort of stuff. How soon is it too old? But I think Fridays has been pretty good for us, getting in for a big Saturday card, as we should expect through the end of the season. We might need to get creative for the conference tournaments and stuff, but that's probably the time to potentially add some episodes. So stay tuned there. Thank you for all the support there, of course. And if you want to get this in shorter content versions, which I'm about to record, you can go to Instagram.com/real_G Warner for the reels, which are a minute at a time. And I try to get there as much as possible. But if they're on reels, they'll probably be on YouTube shorts as well. So go check those out if you can. So I guess it's time for the ultimate best bet. I've already mentioned a bunch of times, if you want links to new sports books, you should have as many outs as possible. So if you're not a member of BetOnline or sportsbet.ag, follow the links and go get some free money from the casinos, because that is a really, really good way to increase your bottom line in this sport. Free money, freebies. They don't happen a lot, unfortunately, in the offshore business, but take advantage if you're in the states that are legalized as well. But if you don't have anything with these great online market makers, essentially BetOnline will come out first in almost all sports that I follow. They do. So that's a good spot to be to get an early advantage. If you feel like you know what you're talking about, you put some money and get a really good line, like maybe with Texas Tech -2 or something like that, just happening tonight. But for the ultimate best bet, I guess it's time to get into it. So let's do it. This is the real underscore G Warner. This is betting the pitch, the Champions League edition knockout stages. I'm gonna give you best bets for the first leg and the first week. So we're gonna come back and give also another episode on the Europa League and Europa Conference League. Probably do that on Wednesday night on Valentine's Day because that's super romantic and what everybody wants. And might even add some more with futures potentially on two advanced numbers. Got to make a couple decisions on those tomorrow. But for my ultimate best bet on this episode, I'm going to stay on Tuesday, the 13th of February. And I like that Copenhagen under 3 goals. So Manchester City, they have been awesome. Best club in the world. Finally won Champions League last season. But they're still got a little ways to go to be that kind of full firing force. A lot of F's in there. But I think Copenhagen, they're going to be as strong as they can be with a huge crowd behind them at home. And they're not going to come out since it's a 2-leg tie. They want to keep this as low scoring as possible. So play Copenhagen under 3 in Champions League on Tuesday, the 13th of September. And that'll do it for this episode. I didn't even finish saying February, but I ran up against that minute length limit for the reels and shorts. Thank you for tuning in. And we'll have a much more romantic episode on Wednesday going through the Europa Conference League and Europa League, trying to find some better value potentially there because these teams are all known very well in Champions League, but there's money to be made there as well. So talk to you all very soon, including so I don't have a Tuesday night podcast for the NFL. I guess that's open now. Maybe we'll throw the Europa League out there tomorrow night, but I don't know. Maybe I'll do a baseball one. Maybe I'll do a stock one I've been talking about for a while because I know a lot of people want stock tips as well. So slide in my DMs if you got an idea. You want me to do some stuff now that I have a Tuesday free? Doesn't seem like a good time to go on a date the night before Valentine's Day, but we'll see. But if you got something that you think I should record, tell me, and I will probably do it. So slide on the DMs, real underscore G Warner on Instagram, Patreon, and Twitter, and on YouTube. And I'll talk to you all very soon.